10 Haunting Canadian Mysteries That No One Can Solve. In 2012, homicides made up less than 1% of Canada's violent crimes. Canadian Police Services reported 543 homicides in 2012, translating to a homicide rate of about 1.55 per 100,000 people. Despite these statistics, however, there are currently 3,400 unsolved murders in Canada, dating back to 1961. Each year, 1 in 4 murders go unsolved. While some of these cases might have faded from news reports, they still haunt the families and the communities where they happened. If you have information about any of the following cases, contact Canadian Crime Stoppers. 1. Barbara Jean McLean and Melissa Wreck, Calgary, Alberta. In 1981, a Kamloops RCMP investigator named Mikey Stam organized a conference to compare notes on the growing number of unsolved female homicides along highways in the interior of BC and into Alberta. They were dubbed the highway murders because the bodies were found near major highways or the person was last seen along a highway, often hitchhiking. Stam thought the conference would attract maybe a dozen investigators. About 40 detectives showed up, including some from Alberta, making it the biggest meeting of its kind at that time. What detectives found were similarities in cases, including reports of suspicious vehicles and even the names of persons of interest in boxes of paper files. This was well before computers, the internet and email. Investigators then believed there were common factors in 4 cases, including the unsolved Alberta murder of Melissa Ann Wreck and the BC case of Von Ngoc Ha, a 19-year-old Vietnamese refugee, was found on February 28, 1981, near Golden. She had been raped, strangled and her body mutilated after death. The shy teen had come to Canada 7 months earlier and landed a job as a chambermaid at a Banff hotel. Her body was found face down in the snow, a few meters from the Trans-Canada Highway, about 80 kilometers west of Golden, on the road to Kamloops, and 200 kilometers from Banff. The fully clothed body of Melissa Ann Wreck, 20, was found September 16, 1976, in a ditch along a gravel road about 20 kilometers west of Calgary near the Trans-Canada Highway. She had been strangled. She was last seen leaving the Calgary EW, where she lived. She was planning on hitchhiking out of town for her 2 days off work from her job as a chambermaid at a local hotel. RCMP investigators also suspected her killer might be the same man who strangled Barbara Jean McLean 5 months later. The night of February 26, 1977, 19-year-old McLean had argued with her boyfriend and decided to hitchhike home. The following morning, a man walking his dog discovered Barbara's fully clothed, strangled body beside a gravel road near 80th Avenue and 6th Street North. In Calgary, police traced her movements the night before to the Highlander Hotel Tavern, where she and her boyfriend had argued after closing time. The daughter of a retired physician, McLean was originally from Nova Scotia and had moved to Calgary, where she worked at the Royal Bank. The Calgary Herald newspaper reported after the murder. A person of interest in McLean's murder was sex offender Gary McCastocker, 34. McCastocker hanged himself in 1994, in his Edmonton home hours before he was to be questioned by police in the suspected murder of a 14-year-old Edmonton girl, Tina McPhee, who disappeared a month earlier while walking to school. He had just been released from prison after serving his full 11-year sentence for a 1982 rape and a subsequent 1988 sexual assault committed while on parole. McCastocker was also reportedly the prime suspect in the 1976 murder of an Edmonton teenager, Marie Judy Gaudreau, 17, who disappeared August 2, 1976, on the way home to her family's farm on the edge of Edmonton. Her body was found 2 days later near Devon, southwest of Edmonton. McLean and Gaudreau were both strangled and sexually assaulted. McCastocker had been working for an Edmonton-based moving company and was in Calgary at the time McLean was killed. The firm's employees often stayed at the Highlander while on Calgary business, the Herald reported. Another similar Alberta case police looked at during the 1981 homicide conference was the murder of Pauline Brazeau, 16, who had moved to Calgary from York, Sask, in search of a new life for her 9-month-old daughter. A month after her move, she and a friend visited a nearby pizza restaurant, departing about 2:30 a.m. But Brazeau returned alone to the restaurant 15 minutes later to retrieve a pair of gloves she left behind. Her partially clothed body was found about 5 hours later on a forestry road near the Jumping Pound airstrip, about 40 kilometers southwest of Cochrane. She had been stabbed to death. Police believed she had either hitchhiked or was picked up by someone after leaving the restaurant. The other Alberta case probed as having possible links with BC cases was that of Tara Jane White, 18, who last seen July 1, 1976 was in Calgary. White was heading to Lake Louise, where she had a summer job as a dining room waitress. She was a second-year science student at the University of Calgary. Her skeletal remains were found almost 5 years later, on March 24, 1981. In a shallow grave in a wooded area about 60 kilometers west of Calgary. Police believe White either accepted a ride to Banff, Lake Louise at the bus depot where she was picked up hitchhiking. At the time, Golden RCMP Corporal Blair Schaffel suggested the same person who killed White might be responsible for the death of Ha and other highway murders. "There's a possibility we're dealing with an individual that may be a bad guy that's in prison for a while, then gets out," he said. Serial killer Clifford Olson at one time claimed to have personal knowledge and information about the unsolved murders of Ha, Pamela Darlington of Kamloops and others, but police dismissed the claims as bogus. At one time, he, Olson, was confessing to everything, recalled retired senior Mountie Fred Bodnaryuk, who initially headed the Darlington investigation. He was playing games, too. Rona Margaret Duncan, North Vancouver, British Columbia. On the evening of July 16, 1976, 16 years old Rona Duncan and some friends attended a house party on East Queens Avenue in North Vancouver, BC. There were about 60 teenagers from school at the party. At about 1 a.m., Rona and her girlfriend, Marion Bogues, decided to walk home. They left with Bogues' boyfriend, Owen Perry, and Duncan's boyfriend, Sean Maples. The boys went their separate ways as they got close to their homes, and Bogues and Duncan continued on by themselves. Duncan and Bogues parted company near Bogues' residence. Rona Duncan was 5 blocks from her house. It was about 2:45 a.m. at this time. At about 3 a.m. a neighbor of Duncan's heard the sound of a male and female arguing outside of her residence. She woke her husband and he went out to investigate. The husband went to the back of his residence and heard the male and female arguing. He yelled, "What's going on here?" And the noises stopped. He did not hear anything else, so he went back to bed. The neighbor lived 3 houses away from the Duncan residence. Duncan's partially clad body was located the next morning at about 9 a.m. in some long grass behind the neighbor's garage. She had been raped and strangled. Cause of death was determined to be from manual strangulation. Investigators interviewed all of Duncan's friends and acquaintances. Numerous polygraph examinations were conducted, but the case remained unsolved. In 1998, with the advances in DNA technology, a DNA profile was obtained of Rona Duncan's attacker. A list of 172 males consisting of all of Duncan's acquaintances and all of the suspects on the file was compiled. Investigators have obtained DNA samples from the vast majority of the subjects on the list, and compared them with the suspect DNA with negative results. All of the higher priority subjects on the list have been eliminated. Many of the remaining subjects are either deceased or have not been located. 3. Carrie Ann Brown, Thompson, Manitoba. Justice delayed is justice denied, the important legal maxim usually attributed to 19th century British Prime Minister William Ewart Gladstone, means that if legal redress is available for a party that has suffered some injury, but is not forthcoming in a timely fashion, it is effectively the same as having no redress at all. Often it is used quite rightly to refer to an accused person's right to a fair and speedy trial, but in the broadest sense it also means where there is a victim, punishment must follow crime swiftly, surely and with certainty. There has been no justice for Carrie Ann Brown. She remains Thompson's oldest unsolved murder case, slain at the age of 15 sometime after attending a party at a residence on Trout Avenue in Westwood on Thursday night, October 16, 1986. While the unfortunate truth is that there are a number of unsolved murders in Thompson, today we want to focus on the oldest, the cold case of Carrie Ann Brown. 25 years is a very long time. The 3 lead investigating local RCMP officers in 1986 were Constables Pat Cahill, Maggie Gregory, and polygraph and forensic examiner John Dost. The Crown Attorney was Dale Brzezowski. Carrie Ann Brown would have been 40 on August 19. Instead, 2 days after the party, a woman from the riding stable discovered her nude body in a wooded area close to the hydro line between the horse stable and the golf course access roads. Police believe she was killed elsewhere and her body dumped there. It was found on Saturday, October 18, 1986, around 2 p.m. She had been sexually assaulted and severely beaten, bludgeoned repeatedly about the face and head, causing massive injuries. A large, blood-stained stick was found at the scene. A vehicle got stuck in the mud there, and a blue and red air mattress and a black rubber floor mat were used to try and gain traction and extricate the vehicle, RCMP said publicly in 1996. Crime scene DNA samples gathered in 1986 came from at least 2 different men, RCMP told the Thompson Citizen in 1996, adding they have always believed more than one person was involved in the killing. DNA science was in its infancy in 1986, so much of the DNA evidence was re-examined and reanalyzed in the 1990s. New DNA samples searching for matches have been taken, most voluntarily, some pursuant to court orders, from more than 100 people across Canada in the decades since the crime. Days after Carrie's murder, a 22-year-old Thompson man was charged with first-degree murder in connection with her killing, but he was freed 4 months later after being discharged by Provincial Court Judge Charles Newcomb without being committed to trial after a 3-day preliminary hearing ended February 20, 1987. Newcomb ruled there wasn't admissible evidence upon which a reasonable jury properly instructed could return a verdict of guilty, which is the legal test in Canadian law for committal to trial. Then NDP Manitoba Attorney General Roland Penner did not exercise his discretion to issue a rare preferred indictment, which would have sent the case directly to trial. Most of those in attendance at the Trout Avenue party were from ages 14 to 17. The party was held on a Thursday night because there was no school the next day for Carrie and the others at R.D. Parker Collegiate. She had previously attended Juniper and Eastwood elementary schools. Her mom and dad, Ann and Jim Brown, had moved to Thompson like many, so Jim could work in the mine at Co., while Ann worked at Thompson General Hospital as a medical transcriptionist. Ann Brown died some years ago. Carrie's brother, Trevor, lives in Winnipeg, and is active in keeping up the fight for justice for his sister, as is her aunt, Tammy Fenner, and her husband, Kevin, from Maberly, in eastern Ontario, near Ottawa. Carrie was to walk home from the Trout Avenue residence that night with a girlfriend, but before leaving the friend went back into the party for a few minutes. Carrie stepped outside apparently to wait. When the friend returned, Carrie was gone. Several witnesses reported Carrie was seen getting into a van between 10:30 p.m. and 11 p.m. Others believe she took a taxi to Brandon Crescent, or she may have walked somewhere from the party. Anyone who has information on the murder of Carrie Ann Brown has a moral duty to come forward. Justice demands no less. 4. Kelly Jane Evelyn Cook, Standard, Alberta. I remember the 1980s very well, and Pierre Elliott Trudeau's one-finger wave as he came west with his family to see firsthand what his national energy program could do to a robust economy. We were one of a handful of families that held onto our home in Calgary's knee. The neighborhood was like a ghost town. Empty, deserted houses left vacant by 21% mortgages. Oil workers drive trucks, usually 4x4s, and I have worked rigs and know they can be an unsocial, unruly bunch prone to fight over anything. This isn't the work of an oil rigger. I am trying my best to find any serial killer that was in the oil business. You can find lots of manslaughter cases, but none that would lead me to suspect anything this planned or executed. This person wasn't a fledgling killer. He has done this before. It's staring and brazen, and that's his accelerant. It's the capture. I have no idea about the phone call from Hazar, but to me that doesn't seem out of line. Perhaps Kelly did get a fleeting chance to escape and make a quick phone call. However, there is not one shred of evidence that this had anything to do with the case. Let's play devil's advocate and say it was Kelly, and perhaps the guy was from Hussar area. After killing Kelly, he decides it's not in his blood to kill innocent little girls and he fades away? No way is this guy out there, and he can't stop. He is hardwired to the kill and to the chase. It's what he does that defines him. It's like I am hardwired to like women, particular women, size, hair color, demeanor. I have a friend that is gay, not out of the closet either. His life has been hard, and anyone that thinks gay is a choice is ignorant. It boils down to what turns you on. Something in my friend, probably from his birth, makes him find men attractive, as hard as he tries to hide it by hunting and fishing and talking the talk. I see little signs, and once at his house I seen a picture that I was clearly not supposed to see. I was shocked, but it did confirm my suspicions. He hid the picture when I left the room, and I never approached the subject ever. It made me feel sad that my friend felt he had to hide this part of his life from me. I think this person is fantastic human being, period. This guy might be able to live a normal life, have kids, a wife and such, but what no one sees in him is what makes him tick. The secret that he tries every day to keep pushed down. His every fantasy is based around this particular thought. He needs to capture, secure, and be in complete control of a lesser human being, or one that his egomaniacal mind perceives as such. Please forgive my callousness if Mr. and Mrs. Cook are reading this. Your daughter will always be in my heart and thoughts as I live my life, and I hope someday to hear that this person is only minutes away from a nice lethal injection, or better yet, waiting to hear the clang of an electric chair as the lever is pulled. This guy either died of an accident, maybe succumbed to an illness, or is still doing what it is that makes him tick. No other way is this guy living the normal life. Taking other people's lives for sport is not a thing you can turn off. Once you start killing people, it becomes the persona of what defines you to yourself as who you are. The master, the brilliant one, the man in control. My ex-wife's uncle used to be a traveling salesman that sold advertisement space on the signs of bowling lane score sheets. He used to travel to all these small towns and sell these advertising spaces to other area businesses. This is the type of guy that killed Kelly, a traveling salesperson that had business in the area for a brief moment that spring of 1981. Not my wife's uncle. He was a short, bald guy that was married, and his wife traveled everywhere with him. I think the person is a traveling salesperson that was in the area, someone who traveled alone and had a lot of time on their hands. He would have legitimate reason to be in the area and would have had a lot of time to scout out the area, find the laundromat, most likely because he used it to wash his clothes while on the road. Look at all the posts, pick out a victim, and here we are today, no further than the day Kelly was abducted and murdered. These parasites tends to pick out the easiest targets or ways of getting their victims into their hands. Picking up hookers is by far the easiest way. However, this guy's taste is not for hookers. He needs to be in control and would never go for a hooker that would probably make him her bitch. He wants to dominate, and he can only do that if he can find little girls. 5. Lisa Marie Young, Nanaimo, British Columbia. June 30, 2014, marked the 12th anniversary of the disappearance of Lisa Marie Young. Ontario Canada Day weekend, 2002. The 21-year-old was getting ready at about 11 p.m. for a night out with friends. Her father expressed concern that it was late to go out. It would be the last time he would see his daughter. Lisa Marie went to Club 241 located on Skinner Street, in Nanaimo. She was seen leaving the club at around 2:30 a.m. She met a man in the parking lot offering to drive her and her two male friends wherever they wanted to go. The man was described as being in his 20s and driving a late model red Jaguar. They all attended a house party, left, and decided to go to another one. At the second party, Lisa Marie became hungry and asked to go to a sandwich shop. The driver of the red Jaguar said he would take her, and her two male friends decided to stay behind. At around 4:30 a.m., Lisa Marie contacted a friend. The man had not taken her to a sandwich shop, she said. They'd driven to someone's house, and she was waiting in the car for him. She was worried about the driver and about the situation she now found herself in. She was never heard from or seen again. Police were able to locate the driver of the car, interview him, and have forensics go over the vehicle. While he remains a person of interest, police have no evidence against him. His grandmother, a prominent member of the community, owned the vehicle. After she learned about the investigation, she sold the Jaguar and threatened the police with a lawsuit if they kept bothering her grandson. Police continue to actively investigate this case. The family continues with their own investigation. They've organized searches, candlelight vigils, and a run in Lisa's honor to keep her case and name alive. 6. Kimberly Ann McAndrew, Halifax, Nova Scotia. A former Halifax man suspected in a string of unsolved murders in Atlantic Canada has been denied parole again, in part because police are still investigating the killings. Parole Board of Canada documents released Friday show. The documents also reveal that Andrew Paul Johnson, 54, said this spring that detectives were wrong in thinking there was the body of an alleged victim on his brother's property in Shad Bay. It's the first time Johnson appears to have ever spoken about the ongoing police case. During his hearing in April, board members asked him about the major search Halifax detectives conducted on the Prospect Road property in March. The reply you made was relative to the police being incorrect in suggesting that a victim's body was found on the land of a close family relative. Board members wrote in their decision denying Johnson both day and full parole. Some parts of the report are redacted, including who owned the property and details about ongoing murder investigations. The board also said a psychologist who most recently interviewed Johnson, incarcerated since 1999 as a dangerous offender in British Columbia on sexual assault and abduction convictions, and believes it is still too risky to let him out. The most recent psychological assessment concluded, after becoming aware of the ongoing investigation in eastern Canada, that you would in all circumstances be a flight risk if the releases were authorized. Members wrote in their 9-page decision. The psychological analysis was done in February. Investigators scoured the Prospect Road property, where Johnson once resided about 20 years ago, for several days in early March. Officers ordered his brother out of the home while the search of the house, backyard shed and adjacent wooded area was conducted. Detectives did not find human remains but did send cloth or clothing, and pieces of wood obtained at the property for forensic analysis. Johnson was suspected in at least one disappearance and 2 slayings dating back more than 15 years, including that of Kimberly McAndrew, who vanished in Halifax in August 1989. On Friday, RCMP Corporal Scott McRae said he did not know whether results of the forensic testing had come back yet. The investigator in charge could not immediately be reached, said McRae. New information also came to light in the April parole report, including Johnson's history of hiring prostitutes who appeared to be young-looking. It wasn't immediately clear when he solicited sex trade workers. Board members said there were inconsistencies in his recounting of the number he had hired over a 10-year period, and also noted he had a propensity to downplay his sexual addiction and behavior. The board explored your history of hiring sex trade workers. The decision states, you disagreed with the memorandum written by the police in eastern Canada suggesting that you had a history of hiring small-breasted, young-looking sex trade workers. Johnson originally said he hired prostitutes up to 4 times per week but later said the total number he had hired was 10 to 20. You engage in minimalization over this issue, the decision said. Also new was a reference to Johnson's assertion that he was abused by a man when he was a teenager, something he reasoned might be behind his sexual interest in teens. You had a preference for young girls between the ages of 12 and 14, and the board notes that in your index offending you specifically targeted girls of that age. You said that you were sexually attracted to girls of that age because of a link to your own sexual abuse that you suffered at the hands of a man when you were of a similar age. Johnson told officials he thought it was okay to get consent from underage girls because he didn't look at them as children. But you now acknowledge that they are underage children, the decision said. Johnson, who has a lengthy violent criminal history going back to the 1970s, was first declared a dangerous offender in May 2001. That label was imposed after he was arrested in 1997 in Nanaimo, BC, after police learned a man was posing as a police officer attempting to get young girls into his car. When he was picked up, he had a young, mentally challenged woman in his vehicle. A psychiatrist who assessed Johnson in 1998 reported that his possession of a fake police badge and meat cleaver represented a clear escalation in pattern. A previous parole board document said the dangerous offender designation was removed after Johnson appealed in 2006, but he was reclassified at that level in April 2008. Parole board members noted Johnson's behavior behind bars has been satisfactory and has been improving by taking some responsibility for his actions. But he had made some inappropriate comments to female staff members in prison, although he stopped after being spoken to about it, the decision said. But the board also said he had never been able to abide by rules while he was out on probation for offenses committed years ago. There are also no facilities capable of housing and looking after him in eastern Canada, where Johnson said he would like to return. Members said, by law, Johnson will next be eligible to apply for parole in March 2015. Offenders serving under such indeterminate statuses are allowed to have their case reviewed every 2 years. 7. Catherine Mary Herbert, Matsqui, British Columbia. For the nearly 40 years that Shari Greer has searched for her daughter's killer, all signs pointed to one man. Gary Taylor Handelin had just been released from prison for the rape of an 18-year-old housewife. He was dating a 16-year-old girl who lived with Miss Greer's family, and he drove a white car that matched one that was seen near the site of the little girl's abduction in 1975. 3 years after the murder of 11-year-old Catherine Mary Herbert, Handelin was still in the Lower Mainland when another young girl, Monica Jack, disappeared from Merritt, BC, under similar circumstances. That same year, Handelin found himself back in jail for the rape of a hitchhiker who was able to escape and turn him in. It always came back to Handelin, said Lee Hanlon, a private investigator who looked into the Herbert case in 2012, when he was fresh out of criminology school. Despite this, it was not until last Friday that Mr. Handelin, now a 67-year-old man living in Surrey, was arrested and charged with the double murders. Catherine Mary Herbert was last seen on the evening of September 24, 1975 while walking home from a friend's house. Witnesses had remembered seeing a white U.S.made vehicle idling near the site of her disappearance, but had neglected to write down the license plate number. Her badly decomposed body was discovered 2 months later by members of the Matsqui First Nation collecting firewood for a burial ceremony. There were other shady characters around Matsqui, now Abbotsford, who drove white cars, but suspicion quickly turned on a man who not only had violent rape on his criminal record, but had known the victim personally. And then, other disappearances were reported around the Fraser Valley that bore similar hallmarks to the killing of Catherine Mary. Teresa Hildebrand, 15, disappeared from the Matsqui area in 1976. 2 years after that, 12-year-old Monica Jack vanished from Mission, BC, while riding her bike. Police investigators have consistently said they believe that a single man was responsible for all 3 murders, but that they did not have enough evidence to press charges. Even now, nobody has been charged in Teresa's murder. As for Mr. Handelin, on September 11, 1978, only weeks after the Monica Jack abduction, he was living in New Westminster when he picked up a 21-year-old hitchhiker from Quebec. After a half-hour of driving, the 31-year-old Mr. Handelin stopped for a washroom break, grabbed the victim from behind and then dragged her into the woods. He was pressing very hard so I couldn't make any sound. He was trying to strangle me, the woman told the judge. I was afraid he might kill me. I was crying, calling for my mama. The woman escaped after being raped twice, and was able to lead police to Mr. Handelin's front door after motorists rescuing her recorded his license plate. He was sentenced to 18 years in prison. By the early 2000s, he was free and living in Ontario. A Garden of Tears, a 2009 CBC documentary on the Catherine Mary Herbert murder, made repeated reference to a single unnamed man that police and community members alike suspected was responsible. There were no other suspects other than the one I've mentioned. Norm McFarlane, a retired Abbotsford police officer, told filmmaker David Ridgen. Mr. Ridgen also spoke to a childhood friend of Miss Herbert who said that when she was 11, the unnamed man had approached her in a parking lot with a proposition to go necking. In a Monday blog post, Mr. Ridgen confirmed that Mr. Handelin was indeed the unnamed man. Following the broadcast, he said he tracked down Mr. Handelin and confronted him. Not much happened, except that he knew people were watching him, he wrote. Until Mr. Handelin's case is resolved, police will not be disclosing any information about the investigation. Nevertheless, the 39-year search for Catherine Mary's killer has suffered from some setbacks. It was bungled up from the get-go, said Mr. Handelin. The original autopsy report on the girl was only a paragraph long. Her clothes, rather than being preserved at police headquarters, were buried along with the body. Nobody cared. A lot of these investigations were just botched up from day one, Ian McLachlan, another retired Abbotsford police officer, said in A Garden of Tears. And in the 1990s, when the Matsqui Police Department was absorbed by the Abbotsford Police Department, the file appears to have been lost. Also lost were a pair of mysterious letters, addressed to Catherine Mary, that had been sent to her home many years after her murder. The documents were misplaced after being sent to an RCMP crime lab for handwriting analysis. Taken together, all these factors required the Abbotsford police to essentially restart the investigation from scratch. In 1996, on the urging of Ms. Greer, the department started by exhuming the body for a more detailed forensic analysis. Still, more than a decade on, Catherine Mary's disappearance remained in the RCMP's cold case files. Someone knows what happened and who did this to her, said Ms. Greer at a 2012 press conference announcing a $10,000 reward for information leading to the capture of her daughter's murderer. The five-figure sum had been dropped in her mailbox by an anonymous donor. Ms. Greer has had a combative relationship with the police over the decades. She's pressed them to charge a suspect, but at a Monday press conference, Abbotsford Police Deputy Chief Rick Lucy summed up her approach as being driven by tenacity, persistence and love. Oh, and, by the way, Ms. Greer said in her own statement to the press, there is no such thing as a cold case to the families, nor is there ever closure, only resolution, surrounding the events. 8. Jane and Catherine Johnson, Turner Valley, Alberta. The deaths of Jane Johnson and her daughter Catherine have long frustrated RCMP, who have not been able to close the case despite an exhaustive investigation. I know the investigators would like nothing better than to be able to go to the families and say we've solved this. We have an arrest and a charge, said RCMP spokesperson Patrick Webb. Jane was 36 and Catherine was 8 years old when they were killed. Their remains were found by Turner Valley firefighters, after extinguishing a house fire near the Turner Valley Golf Club on September 3, 1996. Initially, it was thought they died from smoke inhalation. Subsequent investigation revealed the pair had been murdered and the fire was set to cover up evidence. RCMP have never released the cause of death. While they have the big picture, he said, investigators need a few critical pieces of information before they can lay charges. I always liken a murder investigation to a jigsaw puzzle. You have the big picture, you know what you're looking for, but before you can make an arrest you have to fill in those blanks, said Webb. RCMP have collected physical evidence and interviewed witnesses, and several friends and family as part of their investigations. Thousands of hours have been spent on the investigation. Interviews have been completed and redone. Police have followed up on hundreds of tips and they have put up information wanted posters. A reward of $100,000 has also been offered for the arrest and conviction of the murderer. However, they have not been able to uncover enough evidence to warrant laying charges. Webb said police have identified people they believe may know details about the case that could help, but haven't spoken out. To commit a murder, or to be part or to know about who committed a murder, there's a lot of guilt, so we're hoping that for reasons of relief from that guilt that these people will come forward. He said the investigation will continue as long as it takes. We've had arrests in murder investigations that are 20 years old, he said. So, in this case, 15 years is a long time. We definitely recognize that, but just because of the time frame it isn't parked. RCMP have identified a person of interest in the case, who is now believed to be living in the Parksville area of Vancouver Island. Police are not releasing the names any persons of interest. Jane's ex-husband said he is certain there are people who can give police the break they need to make an arrest in the case. I do feel there are people out there that could come forward and say what happened, said Sam Johnson. Soon after the murders, he volunteered to take a polygraph test to eliminate himself as a suspect. I demanded one. They didn't even ask me, said Johnson. I demanded to take it because I wanted to make sure they didn't waste 1 minute of their valuable time at the start of the case on me. 5 years ago, the Western Wheel interviewed an ex-boyfriend regarding the case, Henry Reichert, who denied any involvement in the murder. Until that time, Reichert had not taken a polygraph test as part of the investigation. He told the Western Wheel 5 years ago he declined to take the test on the advice of his lawyer. Reichert, who it is believed lives outside Okotoks, could not be reached for this article. Johnson said it's still difficult to think of the murders 15 years later. He will mark the anniversary by visiting their resting place, something he does each year. You don't get over it easily, he said. 9. Susan Tice and Aaron Gilmore, Toronto, Ontario. Erin Gilmore's mind was likely elsewhere as she hurried to close up that night. Her boyfriend would be by soon to take her out for dinner, maybe Chinese food, her favorite. Through the Yorkville boutique's front window, her killer would have been able to watch virtually unnoticed as the beautiful, young blonde woman turned off the lights and locked up around 8:45 p.m. He was waiting for her outside. Gilmore, just 22, lived in the apartment upstairs. It was scarcely 15 meters from the store's entrance to her front door. Did he follow her upstairs? Did he trick her? Did she invite him up? Did she know her killer? This was December 20th, 1983. To this day her death is still a mystery. The only thing investigators know for sure is that her killer had struck before. Susan Tice, 45, had been murdered in much the same way, sexually assaulted and stabbed, 4 months earlier. Back then, homicide investigators were obviously aware of the similarities between the two murders. Single women living alone, late in the evening, attractive women for that matter, that kind of thing. But they didn't know for sure because they didn't have the magic of DNA, that it was the same killer, said it. Sergeant Reg Pitts, who heads Toronto's Cold Case Squad. Pitts was a young officer working in 52 Division the night investigators received a 911 call that a young woman had been killed in her Yorkville apartment. Gilmore's boyfriend had arrived, right on schedule around 9:20 p.m., to find the street-level door ajar. He went inside, calling her name as he walked upstairs. No answer. He looked around her apartment, but she wasn't there. Yet the lights were on. He went back outside and over to the store, dark and locked. Now he was getting nervous. He went back inside to look again and this time noticed the bed duvet was drawn up over the pillows. He pulled it aside and found her. Gilmore had been tied up, sexually assaulted and stabbed repeatedly. The fatal blow went through her heart. An autopsy later revealed it was a brutal crime scene, said Pitts. I was just a young police officer at the time. I remember coming here that night. The place was swarming with homicide detectives. We searched this area far and wide trying to find the knife, unsuccessfully. Little did I know, 25 years later, I'd be taking up the cause again. Just 4 months before Gilmore's slaying, on August 17th, Tice was found dead in her bedroom on the second floor of her Gray Street home in Toronto. There was no sign of forced entry. Like Gilmore, she had been sexually assaulted and stabbed repeatedly in the chest. The crime scenes were only a few kilometers apart. The murders were officially linked through DNA in 2000, but investigators always suspected they were dealing with a serial predator. The problem was the two women had nothing in common. Tice was a mother of 4 who had recently moved back to Toronto from Calgary after separating from her husband. She worked with disadvantaged children and had a nursing degree from McMaster University and a master's degree in social work from the University of Toronto. She had spent much of her marriage following her husband from job to job as he climbed the corporate ladder. On August 17th, Tice's brother-in-law became worried after she didn't show up at a family gathering. He went to the home and noticed mail had piled up. Police believe she had been there a few days. Gilmore, meanwhile, was a rising Toronto socialite. Her father, David, is the longtime partner of business tycoon Peter Monk. She had dabbled in modeling but dreamed of a career in fashion design. While taking classes at a fashion school, Gilmore got her foot in the door by working at a posh Yorkville boutique, Robin's Knits. She created her own clothes from second-hand sources, so was very creative. Clever. I saw her as a fashion editor at some point. She oozed style, said Judith Tatter, one of Gilmore's best friends. She was intensely funny, very private, and she adored her brothers. The day before her murder, Gilmore invited her 2 younger brothers, Sean, 13, and Kellen, 11, over for a sleepover. They spent the night just hanging out. It was something we did every 2 or 3 months, said Sean McCowan, now 39. That was Erin. She was a lovely young woman, and a great big sister. Investigators combed through the 2 women's social circles, hoping for the common thread. Nothing turned up. Detectives believe their suspect may have lived near Tice's home at the time of the slaying. Yorkville has more a set clientele or crowd. This is more of a family neighborhood. Whoever killed Susan Tice would be able to walk around, unnoticed, said Pitts. They didn't know each other in life, but they were killed by the same man. You have to ask yourself, are these the only 2 crimes this man committed? Likely not. 10. Christine Jessup, Queensville, Ontario. For Janet Jessup, the next 3 months will be hell. Each one has its own painful date. Each one comes with a tidal wave of memories that force her to relive the horror of her daughter Christine's murder. No matter how many years pass, the days are no easier to get through. Anniversaries are difficult, Janet says. Christmas isn't the easiest. Her birthday, her death, the date of her abduction. Every year is worth remembering her daughter is dead and the murder is still unsolved. Living by herself in a retirement community, Janet Jessup walks with a bit of a limp after she broke her hip a couple of years ago. However, she is otherwise healthy. Asked her age, she resists. I'm a senior, is all she will allow. She keeps up her driver's license, but doesn't own a car. Jessup's marriage to Bob Jessup did not survive after the murder. They split up in the 1990s. Bob remarried, but Janet has remained single. She is sometimes cranky when the conversation turns to the crime. She doesn't think police are doing much work on this case. What are they doing? Waiting for a call. She received some money from the Criminal Injuries Compensation Board, but just enough, she says, to give her daughter a proper burial. Guy Paul Morin, who was convicted of Jessup's murder and was exonerated in 1995, after improvements in DNA testing, was awarded $1.2 million in compensation. Meanwhile, Jessup says, "We have to live through hell on earth for the rest of our lives. We have no closure." But that's not Guy Palmorin's fault. I'm not blaming him, don't get me wrong, but I think for victims' families that have gone on this long. Holy Nelly, man. Jessup has one other child, Kenny. Jessup also thinks about the killer who tore apart her family and ruined her life. He'd be about 50 now, she says, echoing the belief of criminal profiler John Douglas, who thought the killer would have been in his or her mid-20s back at the time of the murder. The basic facts of the case are unchanged. On Wednesday, October 3, 1984, after Christine got off the school bus, she went home, but no one was there. Her father was at work and her mother was running errands. Sometimes between 4 p.m. and 4:30 p.m., she was seen walking into a nearby convenience store to buy a pack of bubble gum. That was the last time anyone, except her killer, saw her alive. On Janet Jessup's coffee table today is the murder whodunit book Missing Justice by LaFair Burke. On her bookcase, by two Bibles, are books by American crime profiler John Douglas, including Obsession. Beside the bookcase is a tiny cabinet with white figurines that Christine once owned. Nearby are stuffed bears and rabbits, including Christine's favorite toy, a stuffed bunny named Thumper. There are also several little plaster angels. Janet smiles as she shows a picture of Christine in a pile of leaves with her pet beagle, Freckles, whom she'd call Frecky. Christine was 4 when she got Frecky as a puppy. Janet laughs as she talks of how Christine also had a pet frog in the basement. The dog didn't go downstairs. She laughs some more, describing how calm Christine was when a bat flew into her bedroom. Christine was not frightened at all, convinced her visitor was a bird. Janet looks wistful when she talks of how Christine's life would be now, if not for the killer. She wonders about the grandchildren she might have had. She would hopefully be having a normal life, married, have children. Chances are she would have gone on to be a veterinarian. That's what she always wanted to be. She loved animals, all kinds. In the cold case office at Toronto Police Headquarters, DIT Sergeant Steve Ryan looks at a piece of paper with information written on it. "These are 2 more tips on my desk," Ryan says. "This case is still very much alive. 3 weeks ago, we acted on another tip and the guy was cleared. We get from 3 to 5 tips a month. Police have the killer's DNA and it's just a matter of putting a name to it." Ryan finds it a mystery that the killer's DNA has never been tied to another crime and theorizes that the killer may have left the country or is dead. The veteran homicide detective has doubts that the killer just got up one day and decided to kill a girl. Why would he stop at one crime and not commit another and leave his DNA, or had he committed crimes before? Ryan, who late last year made an arrest in a 30-year-old cold case, believes that water cooler chat from someone who knows or heard something could lead to a breakthrough. Maybe at the time they didn't want to be involved, but maybe they're in a better place now. Douglas, the criminal profiler, doubts Christine's attacker overpowered her. It's more likely she was lured away by someone she knew and who knew she was home alone. Perhaps she was eager to show off a recorder she received at school that day. Haphazard knife wounds on her torso suggest the killer quickly lost control. The crime scene was somewhat very much disorganized and sloppy. Therefore the offender will have characteristics that are disorganized and sloppy, Douglas concluded. Douglas wondered if the killer's parents were experiencing marital problems and pressuring him to find a job. Perhaps he had with a girlfriend. He might also have facial scars. Odds are that he had a criminal record for arson and cruelty to animals. He was likely a night owl. Jessup still wonders why Douglas didn't attend the inquiry into the wrongful conviction of Morin for the murder of her daughter. She draws hope from American cold case television programs, in which killers are brought to justice years after the crimes. "I'm just wondering," she says. "A lot of cases have been solved that are 30 years old. Is it feasible to have someone from the states that has solved these cases?" She doesn't want to criticize the police, but she knows they made plenty of mistakes. There have been so many things done wrong, whether it was inexperience, lack of knowledge. Her face darkens as she notes that many of the people with clues to Christine's deaths have gotten older. Memories fade. Witnesses die off. Is it just too late to unravel that and find the right person? She asks. Time does go on. People do forget. I don't know what the answer is. She hopes that Christine's death teaches people something about vigilance. It doesn't really matter that violent crime is dropping in Canada, according to statistics. How can she not think the world has become a more dangerous place? Today we have to be so observant of what is around us, she says. Years ago, you could leave your doors unlocked. She wonders if improvements in communications and technology might help track down the killer. She hopes this story will be read by someone with a clue that finally cracks the case. She feels a need to ask the killer why he felt he had the right to end Christine's life and ruin her own life. I'd ask him why, but I know for sure I wouldn't get an honest answer, she says. Obviously he's a very sick person. Then she pauses and says she often wonders if the killer acted alone. She wouldn't go with just anybody, unless she was forced into the vehicle, unless she was told a lie. Of course, she was so little someone could sweep her in. Maybe there were two killers. We don't know. Often, She wonders about his lifestyle. Is he a person that didn't drink so he didn't spill the beans? She still has regular contact with her adoptive son Kenny. Kenny confessed in court that he and a neighbor had sex with his younger sister Christine several times. After he heard that news, Bob Jessup publicly announced he was no longer speaking with his adopted son, although Kenny was cleared by police of any involvement in the murder. Today, Janet Jessup says she enjoys her seniors community and her new friends. Although she hasn't broadcast her past, it's best not to talk about it, although it's impossible not to think about it. She knows that this will be her future. Down here, they live to be 90, 95, and 100. I don't make it a priority like I used to, but it's still at the top of the list. Our lives are hell on earth forever. There's just no way around it.